Vintage baseball card collectors make up really the dominant group of collectors in the hobby, going all the way back to tobacco cards in the early 1900s. But will this trend continue into the future? Will these players be relevant to future generations and to current generations that are growing up now?
I'm Johnny Bench. This is Krylon Spray Paint, the other leading national brand.
I've been hearing more and more of this type of conversation on different podcasts and different YouTube stations. I've been questioning lately, why are vintage football cards, vintage basketball cards even, just still haven't really caught up to vintage baseball. Now, they have evolved a lot. I mean, there's been a lot more interest in vintage basketball, vintage football, certainly over the last 5 years, but it's still not on the same level. And it could just be that collector base has not evolved yet. There's not enough of those types of collectors, and maybe there never will be. Maybe it'll just be kind of a niche bucket of folks that collect the vintage football and the vintage basketball in comparison to how many are collecting vintage baseball. Now you have, people are getting into culture cards, they're getting into soccer cards, and then the hockey card community is a big community too. There's a lot of diehard hockey card fans.
Blades of Steel. Face Off.
While I am on a little bit of a buying hiatus, I am going to focus my attention on baseball cards in the summertime, but I'm going to put a little bit of a spin on it, and I'll explain how I'm going to do that. But before I go further, thank you to today's video sponsor, ComC.com, your home for buying, selling, and flipping all the hottest trading cards. Their consignment marketplace now home to over 30 million trading cards from baseball superstars like Aaron Judge to Marvel favorites like Spider-Man. ComC has something for every type of collector. Visit ComC.com today to build out your collection with your favorite cards. As I like to say, it is Disneyland for card collectors. Check out ComC.com. All right, guys, so I've been researching vintage baseball really for a couple of years now. I've been close to pulling the trigger on a few different cards. I've got certain targets like the 1955 Bowman Willie Mays, kind of that wooden border, the TV card. I really like that design. And I was looking at one. I've been looking at it. It's just one of those things. I'd looked to pick one up. The price point just wasn't there. I bid, I lost on it. And now actually the price has gone up quite a bit since I had been looking for it. And I've heard folks talk about, hey, is vintage baseball kind of a bubble right now? Because a lot of folks kind of moved out of more of the speculative prospecting style stuff into safe stuff, into the vintage. And now is that kind of a bubble because there's just money has moved over to lower grade vintage stuff, the 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s, some of the mid-grade stuff as well.
61 home runs by Roger Maris.
Hi, kids. That sure was a day for me. Part of the thrill of baseball. The kind of real excitement I've put into my great new game by Pressman, Action Baseball.
Because the high grade vintage is always going to be expensive. Anything, once you get over, 7, 8, 9, and 10s in those grades, you're paying a pretty penny. Most collectors are not operating in that space. But for a lot of folks, it's within range. And so they've been kind of diving into that vintage baseball that's a little bit lower grade. A lot of my collection is made up of Hall of Fame autographs, some with patches, but it's really Hall of Fame autographs or just stars that might not be in the Hall of Fame yet, but I just like auto cards, and then patch autos are cool too if the price point has been right. And so for me, over the last 12 months, I have picked up a few baseball cards, but they fall in that bucket. Here are a couple of examples. And this one I just thought was a cool Nolan Ryan inscription auto. And then also Barry Bonds, who I really believe is going to go down as one of the greatest hitters of all time, if not the greatest hitter of all time. I know the baseball people are going to be all over me as that's blasphemous. His stats were Hall of Fame worthy, in my opinion, before he ever touched a PED. And so I'm looking at kind of just some of the more recent baseball greats. I also picked up, I think it was Topps Definitive or Topps Diamond, Ricky Henderson autograph, and then also a Mark McGwire individual cards. Just thought they were really cool. The one thing I'm not crazy about with some of the Topps stuff that's high end for baseball is it'll have a cool patch on it. I've been researching this. If we're going back to like 2017 to 2021 type products, a lot of the patches are the old, this patch hasn't been used in a game or by a player, or, it's kind of the Dick's Sporting Goods patches that are in those. And so I've been more looking at kind of dual and triple autos. An example that I thought was really cool, it was a triple auto, and it was Andre Dawson, Ryne Sandberg, and Greg Maddux. 3 Hall of Fame players, some all-timers. I mean, if you look at the stats, especially Greg Maddux, these guys were just unbelievable. I mean, there's pitchers, fairly recent pitchers. Another example, Randy Johnson, Roger Clemens. Again, he falls in that PED bucket. But if you look at the stats for Randy Johnson, Roger Clemens, Greg Maddux, these are some of the best pitchers of all time. And I know baseball people say like, oh, well, pitchers don't really get hobby love. I'm not really worried about that because, again, I'm looking at this as kind of long-term hold stuff and also putting that in the bucket of I want stuff that I think is awesome. And so some of those triple autos, you see it all the time where it's like a dual auto and it's like Kenny Stabler, yeah, and Jamarcus Russell, oh. Or it's, Joe Namath, yes, and Chad Pennington. Oh man, that sucks. So like the dual autos, you got to have 2 good players or 2 Hall of Famers or whatever, and then to find a triple where you got 3 awesome players and then maybe even find on card. Man, that's a wicked card. So that's the stuff that I've been researching that I just think is cool and kind of fits into my collecting style. But it's also the thought of, I've been hearing a lot of kind of the vintage baseball card collectors that are saying like, are these Hall of Famers going to be remembered? Are the people going to care about, certain players? And we're not necessarily talking about Mickey Mantle and...
Well, kids, baseball season's here again. And with Post Cereal's baseball trading cards, you can get a rundown on all your favorite players.
Babe Ruth and Willie Mays. Those are kind of the obvious names, Jackie Robinson, that are always going to transcend time and be fine. But it's more of kind of the, those fringe Hall of Famers that maybe just people don't know. And so, yes, you might have a vintage baseball card of this, particular all-star, but just these generations just don't know anything about that player, haven't seen them, or, there's kind of a worry of, is this going to be relevant? It might be cool, but is this going to be relevant to future generations? And for people that are looking at both, I think it's awesome, but I also care about resale value down the road. It just makes you think. And just going back to the PED debate, I mean, there's a lot of folks that came out, Barry Bonds not getting in the Hall, and a lot of people kind of are like, why is this guy not getting into the Hall of Fame? I'm going to make the guess, and again, this could be completely wrong, and it could be that the baseball folks just hold fast to this with PEDs, but I think there's going to be less of a stigma about PEDs as we move forward in time. You look at kind of these, there's YouTubers that are kind of the natty or not, natural or not, basically for bodybuilders and for athletes and these things. It's becoming more talked about and less of this behind the scenes thing where guys are keeping it secret. I think that it's going to be a little bit more out in the open as we move forward. And I think that maybe they even lessen kind of the testing, because frankly, I think there's a lot of guys in all 4 major sports that do stuff or have done stuff and flew under the radar because they got around testing or whatever. They knew some tricks. If we're collecting certain players because they weren't on PEDs, hopefully that of, that could, maybe it comes out later, maybe it never does. I think that gets a little bit tricky, especially when it comes to baseball. And baseball collectors are so big on stats. Baseball fans in general, they care a lot about hits and saves and Ks and all the rest of it. They want to know all the stats, home runs. And so when I just look at the crop of players from the last 30 years that were just really, really dominant, I'm finding there's really a lot of cool cards that aren't necessarily the most hobby relevant, the most collected, but are just awesome. So I wanted to share that with you guys. Let me know in the comments below. Vintage baseball, and we're not talking about the Mantles and the Mays, the obvious stuff that will always be relevant, but vintage baseball that might be kind of those lesser players, good players, but maybe not Hall of Famers or fringe Hall of Famers, or maybe just lesser known Hall of Famers. Do you think that stuff carries over as well moving into the future? Or do the next generations look at kind of the players from the last 10, 20, 30 years and kind of hold on to those players? Let me know. Stay healthy, stay awesome, and I will talk to you again later.